Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. Today I'm bringing you what I think is one of the most popular nonfiction books of 2021, Becoming Abolitionist by Derecka Purnell. So this book, and I gotta bring that in closer because the cover art, honestly, that's fantastic. Let's just soak that up. So this book, as you would imagine, it's about abolition, and so I think a lot of us last year kind of learned that the nexus of the policing argument is basically reform or abolish. And I tried to learn as much as I could at that time. Have a review of The End of Policing by Alex Vitale on here, Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balco, but none of them really addressed abolition in this way. And I would say that this one right here, The End of Policing, it is about abolition, but this Derecka takes it a lot further, I would say. I think that is just how you could pick apart a police department. That's almost like a great reader for people just saying defund the police. If someone responds how you're gonna take away, it's well, look at this. There's segments that it would help take pressure off. So this really outlines a lot of misconceptions and really helped me kind of get my head around it. It's not that I'm saying now I've become an 100%. I lean that way heavier than before and more kind of grounded or sure-footed in that feeling rather than reactionary and seeing police videos and be end it. And so this really, I think one of the main notes for me that kind of came through on it was that abolition seems like it's such a swinging of a hammer, done, no pulley, and it's not that. It's a process, and so every step you make then takes pressure off of police but aids society as well. Then you do that another time in another area, pressure off, and the need for police lessens. It addresses so many aspects of it, but goes deep into her history, having been through so many protests following police violence, her process through law school and everything happening at that time and her work through it before it really gets into some of the basic questions. Everyone asks what about murders? What about rapists? Whole big chapter on each one, and a great way to break it down. Doesn't deflect at all, but it just really highlights, we have a system that leads to murder and leads to rape, and what police are and aren't able to do in those situations currently. And then what do we do going forward? So, in the instance of rape, so much of it happening within a person's household or within their family, that so much of it isn't this a stranger pounced on someone that it's made out to be. And so she talks about a class where a guy had said something. They were talking about having sex with someone when they're asleep as a form of rape. It's no, it's not. I've had sex with my wife when she's asleep many times. That's not rape. And sir, I think person on the other end of that would be real happy with it. So I think as we better understand and evaluate sexual abuse, we recognize that it's not always these criminal, yes, criminal, but not this sort of there's a rapist out on the streets kind of looking around, or looking to snatch people up. In the sense of murders, all the reasons that people end up being murdered, and so many of them stemming from poverty in some way or another, the disparities in wealth, even just things changing the way we do transportation, where carjacking's gone wrong, or so many, and things like this where you kind of address why are people being murdered. It's not always just I hate that person so much I want to kill him. It's a situation came up where someone is making a move, and so you start to really dissect these and realize that capitalism is a major factor in it. And I really liked, that's what I did not get from End of Policing, to my memory. I read that probably 2 years ago at this point. But it was really cool to hear her say that. And I think that her admiration of the Black Panthers had a big influence on it, where she recognized socialism wasn't, a taboo word you can't say. told it like it is, and it's not saying that like if we just end capitalism, everything's good. Like, no, there's a lot of things going on, but I do think a more equitable society where we don't have this massive gap that continues to grow in terms of wealth and class and who's going to prison and who's not. Those sorts of things will reduce not only crime, but then the need for police. And so it's more conceivable of imagining or it's more easy to conceive of a society where police would not be as needed, or the current institutions could be abolished, and we have this breadth of options to call when you call 911, and specialists that are really meant to handle mental illness, where police, I don't know what to do. Like, they're even on a simpler case, like I think it might have been in Rise of the Warrior Cop, where there was a town that just had tons of like wild dogs all over, and police are getting calls on it. It's like they have no training for that. Like, if you just look at like bare minimum that, like, recognize like they're overloaded. To say defund the police means put funds elsewhere into groups that have training for those things. At the bare minimum, I think everyone should be able to understand that. I know defund the police is not language that has really focus grouped well, but I think abolition, as staunch of a word as it is accurate when you look at the quality of policing and what it is that if someone is opposed to abolition, so what is it that you want to uphold from this? Because there's a lot that isn't worth upholding. And so I think when you recognize, kind of like End of Policing did very well, of like what's the issue, and then what's the typical reform that's suggested, and then why did that fail? Always. So like that sort of nexus of like reform or abolition, this was the best way to convey the abolition side that I have ever read and like or ever heard in some dialogue or anytime it explained. She does such a good job and really made police, I wouldn't say reform, but just police justice around policing her career, and not just through like protests on the side, like through the legal system and everything in between. And so I was very glad to have her history as the sort of prelude to the deeper issues, because you recognized it wasn't someone who just is like very anti-police explaining their view articulately. It's someone who is coming from the position of saying like, I've seen the ins and outs of this system for decades. It's not something that if we keep carrying on with everything, all the policing, capitalism, all this stuff the way that it is, it's not just going to get better. Reform won't help. And so it's not only a book about necessarily police abolition, but prison abolition and just the prison industrial complex, which I think is a huge driving factor in what happens on the streets. We think of prisons as these faraway places, but they have direct impacts on our lives. If you've ever had a traffic stop and you're not, like a 40-plus-year-old white lady, there's a part of that cop's mind that says, if I could turn this into a little something more, though, like, what if they have something in the car? What if I got 2 tickets out of it? Like, there's that push. And I've been to jail twice. It's a place where once you get in there, you are fully dehumanized. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. All I learned is that I hate the system we have in place. I came out of it angrier. And we're just putting people in these cells in horrid conditions, and then they're supposed to come out and have gratitude for the system. And it's just so broken. And so I think when you recognize that abolition is not only just like your local police department, as it is prison and for-profit prison system and all of the economic structure behind all of this that leads to the disparities in who is going to prison. I recognize my privilege that I've been pulled over many times and didn't have it get taken any further. And I've had a time where I've gotten pulled over and talked my way out of it. And that probably doesn't happen as much to people who don't look like me. So this book right here, though it was an emotional read because there's so many personal stories, not necessarily personal of her, but, as current as George Floyd, being that this is a 2021 release. I mean, this is a very current book, so it's not just going all the way back to like Trayvon Martin. It has Trayvon, George Floyd, everything in between, and past. And so it tells a story of things not getting better but worse. It tells a story of police generally, even if we say like they got arrested or they got fired, like, oh, that's a big win, but then they don't go to jail. The conviction and the sentence served is justice, if you can even call it that, for taking someone's life. Because as she points out in the book, justice means that the other party agreed to that. That's it between us. Okay, that's justice. Obviously, you can't have that dynamic in a murder. And so it is an emotional read, but it's also so level-headed at the same time, which I think is hard to get for an extended amount of time in the discussion of policing or the prison industrial complex. So I really adored this book. Probably one of my favorite nonfiction reads of the year. I will say it kind of begins with the most readable parts. It's all very that's not the right word. It's all very readable, but it gets heavier and heavier, I would say. The last chapter especially, as it gets into like climate change and things where there's not as much of like a turnaround solution for it. So I would love to see abolition move forward. Not necessarily, I've seen some cities say, we're getting rid of our whole police department and stuff. Like, I don't think that's the right approach. I think doing it wrong sets it back further, kind of like how psychedelics were used clinically, 40s, 50s, 60s, and then people are just like ripping them, like everyone should take acid and stuff, and that sets it back way further. So I would like to see abolition done correctly, because I think that's how it fully moves forward. And I think that this book is a great way to kind of lead things in that direction. So if you've been curious on that argument, it's not to say that you want to switch sides and become an abolitionist versus a reformist. It's kind of like just studying the other side on debates, like even like the vaccine thing. Like, I would want to know where both sides are at so I can kind of have my grounding in the scope of the discussion. And I think that sort of education that we put on ourselves is important when we want to have a say in complex issues, or when things come about, be that another police killing or something in our local area, that we're well informed preemptively. So I think that this book is a phenomenal tool for anyone in society these days. If you have any other policing related books that you would like to see reviewed on this channel, drop a comment below. Drop a little thumbs up if you like this too. Drop a little subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. It helps a lot.